Hey everyone, and welcome back for our final installment of the Patch Management webinar series. My name is Matt Coker and I've been here with you for the past 3 weeks, and with me as always is Dan Powers. Also joining us today, we're happy to introduce the very talented Frank Hansen, who is newer to the Champion team, been with us within the year I think, and Frank is our lead developer on our eBridge technology, which is integrated into ServiceNow. And today we're going to be focusing on the integration of Bigfix and ServiceNow. Frank is going to show us all of this shortly, and as always at the end we'll make sure to leave enough room for questions that you all may have. And also if anyone wants to stick around for a little while afterwards, I'm sure Frank and Dan might have some other cool things to show us as well. All right, so just to recap, guys, from our previous weeks, in week 1 we gave a really high-level overview of Bigfix. We talked about the different modules inside of it and the importance of the relays in your environment, and then we also took action on a few fixlets in our test environment, and we showed all this live. Week 2 we got a little deeper. Dan showed us how to build a couple different baselines, and we discussed building our target groups, whether they were automatic or manual. And then we also, we actually repurposed our compliance reports from that week 1, and we ran it again in week 2 to show you how detailed and items that we can get out of it. Last week we focused on change management. And if you remember, Dan discussed how to incorporate your patching groups into a patching cycle, and we kind of drove this via an Excel file sheet, right? Which it works in most environments, but what we're really looking to try to do is that, show you this in a true CMDB, something like ServiceNow, or what Frank has developed for eBridge. And that's exactly what Frank is going to show us today. So without further ado, Frank, I'm going to turn it over to you, sir, and let you get into it.
Hey, Matt, let me interrupt you for a second just before Frank starts. So remember, we ended last week on this change management side. So I just want to take a second to review this a little bit again. And remember what we kind of did, we picked that Patch Tuesday, right, which shows up on the 9th. It's very predictable of the month. And we kind of separate systems. We call them very easily Group A, B, C, and D. Again, you can call these anything you like. We just kept it generic, but usually A would be your test systems. Week B is your QA test systems. C is really production, and Group D is maybe your sensitive systems. This way, after patches come out, you have a little burn-in time. If people do recall patches, make update to patches, you have that testing in QA weeks to make sure that your baseline that you put together is really accurate and everything's working well. And hopefully by the time you hit your main production systems, you've really worked out what patches you want to deploy, if there's any update to those patches and so forth. And we're still way within most people's SLAs. So that's kind of where we left off last week. And this is where Frank's going to pick up with the ServiceNow piece. Now, last week we showed you most of the places that we've gone to, they do this within an Excel spreadsheet, something that I showed right here. So we've created that Excel spreadsheet last week. We imported that data into Bigfix, and that helped us create less baselines and take less actions, because each endpoint itself knows what week it's going to be patched, knows what day, what its time window is, if it could reboot or not, right? So a lot of those questions, if we enable the endpoint to actually know this information, it helps us as the patching folks to be able to deploy patches easier throughout our environment. And what we're trying to do is leverage a source of truth. And in the ServiceNow world, what Frank's going to show us, that's exactly what ServiceNow is supposed to be, is that source of truth. So I just wanted to interject that real quick, and then let's let Frank show us in action of how this stuff actually really works.
Thanks for the intro, Matt. And what I want to cover in today's session is I'm going to go through a Bigfix and ServiceNow and what things make sense to integrate, what things are important from both an individual standpoint in Bigfix and an individual standpoint in ServiceNow, how you can utilize Bigfix to either augment discovery or use instead of discovery, and then go into the service automation side of patching and how we created a solution where we called it eBridge that does just that. It pulls data and provides a bidirectional feed to and from ServiceNow and Bigfix. And lastly, we'll go through a live demo and kind of walk you through the moving parts. So Bigfix and ServiceNow is that, really every company that we've dealt with that has both of the products looks to do some type of integration with that. what we've done is we did, being the Bigfix SMEs, we thought of the things that make sense to bring across. And then it just kind of cascaded from there. And as you can see in the navigation bar there, we bring all the important elements of Bigfix into ServiceNow and provide the capability to perform service catalog, service requests against certain things. So if you want to patch from within ServiceNow, if you want to modify computer settings, if you want to execute tasks, we have all the data available. We've mined that data in a way that we can then reuse properties and create relationships from Bigfix into other elements within ServiceNow. So inventory with a purpose. In our mind, Bigfix can be used to perform discovery in almost the same way that ServiceNow discovery works today. ServiceNow's discovery could be a combination of scripts that go out and perform Nmap scans or perform ping sweeps. You can have any scripting capability go off and do this type of data gathering. We have a component that does the same thing, but then we decided to tie in Bigfix REST API to pull computer core properties and computer settings. And by pulling this data in, we then, a byproduct of this gives us the relationships that tie in whether a computer is relative or the relevance of a computer would map to a specific group or to a baseline. And we don't have to worry about any of that because we utilize Bigfix on the back end, and the inventory components in ServiceNow, we're only using them to perform an action. And again, we can also report on this data, and from there we can take action and perform some functions that I'm going to go through here in a minute. So then that brings us into patching with a purpose. So patching in ServiceNow can be handled in a couple of different ways when instrumenting this with Bigfix. We've done it in both the two ways that I can think of. The first way is with a service catalog. And a service catalog in ServiceNow has a record producer and a series of things that you can have presented to the user and then perform an action against that set of questions that you ask. So in our case, we've created 4 service catalog request items, one for baselines, one for individual paths or patches and tasks, and then if you want to update a computer setting. And those service catalog requests, what's nice is we have full auditing capability, and we can tie those into a workflow to look for approval processes, notifications, and things of that nature. So the next thing is this kind of falls in line to what Dan had presented, and the way that he instrumented patching and the maintenance window type capability. We mimic that in ServiceNow by creating a service request that has a patch group, and then from that patch group, I've included things like I want to run this against a Bigfix group, or I want to include a baseline. Also in Dan's example, he had the whole notion of patch day. So we included in our service request the notion of patch day, and then patch time, start time and end time. And then lastly, we have included in our example a reboot yes or no. Now this can obviously be automated back on the baseline or with an additional component. We just included it in here just as a as a proof of concept to show you any attribute that is exposed in the XML component of the REST API for a baseline can be added in a service request, and you can go and perform an action against that. It's nice to see it in a slide deck, but I always prefer to show the real thing. And I'm going to switch real quick out of the PowerPoint. And I'm going to have here, I have side by side a instance of Bigfix, and I have our instance of ServiceNow. And what you can see on the screen here is, we've created a bridge component that brings in elements of Bigfix. And we have a series of menu applications tied into our core product, which this is a scoped app as far as ServiceNow is concerned. So we keep the app separated from the regular CMDB and the other ServiceNow specific things. And by doing that, we can then tie in from our extended tables into ServiceNow. So the first part of this really is the discovery side of things. And when we went down the path of integrating ServiceNow and Bigfix together, the REST API is the cleanest way to do it, but sometimes not always the fastest way. So we've had to split this up into two pieces. The first piece is, anything that's heavy lifting as far as pulling big chunks of data. We're utilizing the mid server in ServiceNow and doing JDBC requests to pull large chunks of data. And those are things that are non-actionable type, data sets where we want to pull, like all of the actions that may have ran, or maybe we want to pull the baseline data. Because baseline data, while it doesn't seem like a big deal, there's many abstract components tied to baselines. As you can see here, I have baselines that are, have associations with properties, and then the properties are associated with components, and then there's values tied to it. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. So we elected to have some of these things go through JDBC and do SQL queries to pull it, and some of them to go through REST requests. So I'm going to walk you through a few of those things now. The first piece is really just to gather the inventory component of Bigfix, and I have a Bigfix computer section here. And as you'll notice, anything related to like Bigfix properties, I can pull that data directly, and it's all grouped by the host. Anything related to computer settings, same kind of thing. I can pull all of that data. And then as I drill into the individual computer, I'm now in the actual CMDB within ServiceNow, but I have associated actionable tasks that I can go and perform against the Bigfix endpoint if it is an endpoint. You'll notice up here I have a few action buttons if I want to go get updated computer settings or if I want to go grab computer data. Also down here you'll notice I have any of the computer setting data in a related list, the core properties, where this computer might be tied to a baseline, and then if there's incidents associated with it, those will also show up as well. So that discovery piece was the first part of what we needed to build and gather, and I feel like we did a really good job in pulling the elements from Bigfix and refactoring it so that it's a pretty fast and seamless process, all automated, all through REST and JDBC, and it all happens in a scheduled task, that once you deploy the application and start, you don't have to worry about it. So the next piece of it then was, okay, now we want to do some automation, and let's say we want to update a computer setting, or we want to perform, create a baseline dynamically, or we want to push a baseline. All those things were kind of like on the forefront of our mind of saying, these are the things that we have to do today to integrate Bigfix and ServiceNow. And I'll jump back to the computer section for just a second, just to kind of give you an idea of something. So as we look at Dan's example with his patch group, so if we were to filter on patch group, you'll notice I followed in line with his group A, B, C, and D. And let's say we're in a situation where we want to modify this particular patch group for this particular server. Now, if you're a Bigfix admin and you have the console available, sure, you can go in, right-click, edit computer settings. If you're not a Bigfix admin, but you still need to have this pushed into a specific patch group, you can come into our service requests and down under the update computer settings, and I can come in here and I can say, find me a host. So let's say I want to apply it to my database box, and let's say I want to update Dan's patch group, and let's say I want to change it from Group C to Group A. I can kick that off, and what you'll see happen over in the Bigfix side of things is it'll automatically invoke an action, and you'll notice now it just kicked off this action, so it's all happening through the REST API. And if I go down through here, I can also see that it's, my request was to change that to Group A. So that'll run, just in normal Bigfix fashion, and will, happens behind the scenes again. And now we have this whole track record of what's going on from a service request perspective. So that's one nicety, being able to perform those kind of actions. But more importantly, what happens in like lifecycle and full-scale patching is that you need to go through some kind of approval process. Now, what we've done for that is same thing in a service catalog, but now in our baseline request, We provide the user with the ability to select a group, select a patch group. They can pick any set of fixlets that were pulled in. Now, I'd like to also mention that we tie in sites and fixlets based off of the category field in Bigfix, and we have a specific value that we set in there because we don't want to pull in everything. That gave us a nice way to filter things and provide a cleaner set of data going into ServiceNow. I also included his patch day and then patch date and time, and then I included the reboot on here. And then, if we want to add it to a Bigfix baseline, we have to include that. Now, all of this behind the scenes goes through a really simple workflow. And as you can see on my screen, I have a simple workflow to perform this baseline request. And it goes through an approval process. I do a little bit of logging. I like to keep, a nice audit trail of things. And then once I pass the approval process, I run our script include that will perform the baseline with our, variables passed to the individual include script. And then based on the response, it will come back and do update the status and then log the message. If it happens,
Frank, can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
Okay, so for the folks that have been on for the patch 1, 2, and 3, right? Part of that is we were slowly building up this automation, right? Hey, how do we take action? We obviously see Frank can do that via ServiceNow. That's awesome. And then we build this notion of the patch group, setting times, and the whole point was to make it an automation standpoint. Now, the screen Frank has up here, he's showing you how to go in and override stuff. The other thing to note, because this data gets fed via the REST API into ServiceNow from Bigfix, is on that Patch Tuesday when new patches, I'm going to pick Microsoft because everybody gets Patch Tuesday. As those patches come out, when Frank comes into the ServiceNow side, right, we looked at how do people normally go to CAB and get patch approvals for change management. And it was, okay, here's the set of devices. So Frank can pick a group of devices, and underneath there where all those patches are, ServiceNow, because it pulled the data from Bigfix, knows what patches are applicable to that set group. So the other thing of saving time for you is simply creating, as Frank was demonstrating, I just don't know if everybody got the point, is I could come in here in ServiceNow and create that service request that says, hey, I'm the patch guy. Here's the set of machines I'm trying to patch this weekend. Here's the relevant patches. This does it for you automatically with 2 clicks. And then Frank's workflow, and that's what he's showing you is, hey, once that request goes through, it will automatically go back, kick off the baseline. I think that's what Frank's going to show you next. But for those of you that are looking at this and saying, hey, where's the other value here? That is kind of the concept, just from patching scenario, is we can make that service request, what patches, what systems, what are relevant, into your service request to get approval, and once that's approved, everything's automated at this point.
Yep.
Sorry, Frank, I'm done.
Nope, that's a great segue. Thanks, Dan. So, in our service request side of things, again, these are what's called record producers, and in the ServiceNow side, if you're doing anything with Service Catalog, you're probably already familiar with what a record producer is. And basically, you can construct this service catalog entry to look and feel any way you want it. We just tried to model this similar to what Dan was presenting in the previous examples, with the exception of I included a set of groups in here. And I want to be able to, pull out all the groups that I fed directly from Bigfix and be able to select and say, hey, I want to run this against all my Windows servers. And I want to change patch group to this. And let's say I want to add these fixlets to my baseline. I got to give it a baseline name. Let me give it an all Windows name. Important. I have to pick a patch day. And then from the patch day, I want to pick the date and time. And, just say, let this guy go there. And then reboot yes or no. And then click submit. So now what happens here in the background for this particular one is that we have our workflow tied into it, and there's an approval process. So one of the things that we did was we said, okay, we need a Bigfix group. So we created a Bigfix group called Bigfix Operators. And in that Bigfix Operators group, we then assigned a given user to it. And now what I'm going to show you is that user now, there's a request approval waiting in that user's queue. So I'm going to go up here into ServiceNow. I'm going to impersonate a user. So I'm going to impersonate my Frank Hansen user. And I'm going to look down to my approvals. And then I'll sort by create date. And I have a few requests in here that I need to approve. And this was to do my all Windows task. And now I can go, and again, my workflow is really simple, right? It just says, hey, this guy has to approve it. It doesn't have to do anything else, which you can make that as complex based on your policy of your organization or whatever. And then I'm going to say approve now. And now the approval process finishes the workflow. And he's doing a REST request at the moment. And what will end up happening here is now the approved request, and this is an add message that's easily added into ServiceNow. And now if I switch back, my request from that user now will kick off a baseline. It will perform an action, and then we'll notice here we have an important action. And now what will end up happening here in a moment is now we can go back in and look through the reporting side of things, and we're able to track end-to-end our list of requests. So I've included a widget here that shows the sample requests, so like our baseline requests. And as it goes through the process and it gets the return status data, we'll start to see any request that occurred. We're able to track what that request was, what the action response was. And then as the baseline will run through its exercise and components are installed or not installed, action status data is then also retrieved. So the other piece of this is if a component fails and one of the fixlets doesn't run for whatever reason, we have the full set of action data being pulled in. And this, if you look, if I come into my navigation and I pull up my actions, I can see what has occurred. Oops, sorry, wrong one. I now get a track record of what's occurred in the environment. And, just from an action standpoint, there's a limited set of data that you get, but we're pulling back everything, that's valuable, at least from an action side of things. And one of the workflows that we built was if the action status goes into failed, it will automatically create an incident. And the incident then is assigned to the CI or the configuration items assignment group. And then the end user would receive that incident in their queue.
And what we're trying to show you here, right, is for most people, whether you use ServiceNow or not, right, your standard practice of, again, having to generate the group of machines, generate which patches, be able to submit that into your change management process, whatever that happens to be, getting that approval, and then going back into your tool set and actually running the actions, and then manually sitting there watching everything happen and have to record it into your incident problem system. Everything happening here that Frank is showing you is automated, right? Now, he's bopping around screens to show this point, but if you even look on the right side of Frank's screen, you'll notice that the Bigfix baseline got created and kicked off, right? Frank didn't touch the Bigfix screen at all, but I noticed that action pop in because ServiceNow directed it. So the whole point here is to save, is to automate the mundane, right? Is to alleviate time. What we notice in a large environment, to do some of this could have taken your patch operator a few hours every week just to gather the data, submit the ticket, go through the CAB meeting and all of this. Frank showed you all the overrides, but again, those patch groups and windows, as that data assets are added and you put that information in there, we're leveraging the CMDB as the source of truth. So he could simply target that baseline to the whole set of systems. And just like we showed you last week, if this is not your patch group, or your week per se, even though that baseline kicked off, your machines won't get patched until you're in your time window, right? So this is the savings that we're trying to show from an automation standpoint and from an auditing standpoint inside of your ticketing system.
Yep. So the other byproduct of this is as we discover Bigfix data, if your environment's policy is that everything has to have a Bigfix agent on it, one of the things we know just by nature of when we populate our portion of the CMDB is we know if a computer has or has not had the agent installed. And one of the things you can do, this can either be a UI policy button or it can be a service catalog. I added it as a policy button to say, hey, like if I look, I know in my lab, any computer that has STC on it, try that again. I know any one of these computers has the agent on it. So if I was to go into it, I see I can go and pull the settings or I can pull the patch data. But let's say I have a computer that didn't have the agent installed on it. I now get a button and I can perform a Bigfix install on the agent. Now, obviously, the back end of this has to work with a relay, and you have to have installed a Fixlet prior to this. But the REST call still calls a Fixlet with the Fixlet ID and performs the action.
Hey,
So there's
Frank,
all kinds of really cool integration you can do.
so this is a good question. So in your example, how did you know the agent was there versus not? What other data were you pulling from? Because obviously we're talking about Bigfix integration. You obviously have computers that don't have a Bigfix agent. So how did you know that?
Yeah, so what I ended up doing is as I discover Bigfix computers, I flip a switch on it. And you'll see this Bigfix enabled switch. Just like, out of the box CMDB within ServiceNow, they have an is virtual switch, right? We added an is Bigfix enabled. And if you look at computers that have Bigfix enabled, you'll notice over here to the right, as I discover those devices, I set that switch on the CMDB. And then it's really easy for me then to have a UI policy that says, if true, then do not show the button. If false, show the button.
And this is going to be an easy softball question to you, because this is what we get asked all the time sometimes, especially in a large environment. They come back and say, hey, did you get the Bigfix agent installed everywhere? And a lot of times our answer is, we don't know. Can you show me a report or something that shows in your environment what has and does not have it? Because you're pulling data from Active Directory and live scans.
Yep, absolutely. So there's one of two ways. So I have a report that shows it on my main dashboard, but a really quick way is I can come in here and just say, hey, show me who has it installed and who doesn't. So now I see, here's the computers that have it installed. So if I click on it.
And the reason I bring this up, because the core eBridge technology that Frank did is leveraging the discovery data of ServiceNow. And also his eBridge does a discovery, but also pulls all the metrics from Active Directory. This was great, and my softball question to him was a softball question, but it's true, is, hey, how do I know the agent's installed? So while we're focusing on Bigfix here, other girders or other integrations we have, let's say from Carbon Black or a mobile device scenario, we can do the same thing. Hey, is AirWatch deployed on all my mobile devices? Leveraging the source of truth inside of your CMDB is going to help us figure that data out.
Yep, and what's just to kind of add on to what Dan was saying is, we discover all of the Bigfix specific data, the computer settings and properties, and maybe additional custom property data that we might be interested in. But in addition to that, we also go out and we say, hey, we know about Active Directory, right? We know about vCenter. Let's go pull the data that we can get from there. And we get a rich set of data from each one of those components. And then that we use together with our Bigfix data to make decisions that are more intelligent.
That's cool. Hey, Frank, can you bring up the dashboard again that you had? Because to me, just an overall view was really cool, right? So this alone, right? And I know if you scroll down, for example, we're going to see that one example of data from other sources, whether it's a scan, Active Directory, whatever, and you're comparing it in this case with Bigfix data. Right, I thought you had it in this one down where you had a report that showed you, hey, out of all my devices, which ones have the endpoint installed, which ones don't?
Yeah, I just showed that report.
Oh, sorry.
I took it off the dashboard.
No problem. But again, I know we're coming up at an end of time, and there's a lot more things Frank could show you here. But again, going back to that idea of the whole patching scenario we brought out, when we talk to big enterprises, is the patch folks aren't necessarily the folks that know what every server, what every application is doing. So our point was, well, this should be in a source of truth. Last week I showed you that source of truth being an Excel file. It's workable, but obviously prone to a lot of errors. For those folks that have a CMDB, as you know, application owners bring on new servers, they should be filling out the information of what is this server, what is this patch group, what is this patch window, am I allowed to reboot this or not? As they onboard those systems, what Frank was trying to show you as the patching guy, he doesn't have to worry about their patch group. He doesn't have to worry about what their patch window is. He figures out the relevant patches because he has the data in ServiceNow, submits the request, gets his approval or not, and then initiates the patch workflow, and that data and incident reporting is happening all automatically. So, and again, I know we were up to 2:30. Do people have questions at this point?
Hey, Dan, we got one here from Fernando Martinez. He was saying, are you able to report SLA compliance, for example, for security patches?
So, and again, Frank should probably answer this better than I, but yes, you can. Right? So part of that in every organization, right, is what is your SLAs? So you might obviously, you know, your environment may be, hey, critical patches have to be hit to these set of servers in 30 days, whatever that is. That information, of course, can be added into ServiceNow as your SLA. And because we're pulling those groups in, right, because let's also take into consideration, you know, your critical servers may have a slightly different SLA than your dev environment, or other servers, right? So part of that is in Bigfix anyway, we would say, hey, create an automatic group that show me your SQL servers, which obviously we can do very easy, or what your, you know, an automatic group of different types of servers. We can then add your SLA information into ServiceNow, and as Frank's pointing out, hey, I have the data. I can slice, dice, create reports very, very quickly. On that note, and I'll just bring this up, Frank didn't demo it today, but for folks that have like the compliancy module, right, inside of Bigfix, great module. Sometimes it, you know, the work there is really in setting it up. What we were looking at doing with eBridge and into ServiceNow was, hey, just enable those external sites, and then we can have drop-down lists based on your devices, and we can show you from a compliancy module standpoint, not just patches. We can obviously show you that, right? But we can then also show you, what about all the configuration items, right? Are we mapped up to DISA-STIG? Are we mapped up to the CISA, right? Is the passwords compliancy set? Are the, you know, screensavers turned on all your desktops type things? So yes, it's a very simple report data that we could add into here, and some of the default reports that we are adding. Frank just didn't demo it today.
Yep. I mean, the big point with that is that we have the data. And by having the data now, we've added intelligence around what to do with the data in more than just, you know, the Bigfix nomenclature, right? Because some of this information is very useful to other parts of your organization. You know, some people want to know, well, who patched something when, right? And we can pass that Bigfix data over to the AD folks that are in ServiceNow, and we can pass AD data over. So, I mean, we have the capability of pulling, you know, any of the patch-related information. So to show, prior to Bigfix being put in your environment, you know, a great report is to say what has been patched and is not relevant to remediation from Bigfix. So we have all of those, you know, those data elements, and by, you know, bringing that together and creating a correlation between that data, you know, we're able to make more informed choices on what to do next.
Yeah, and to keep going with that as well, again, this was to focus on the Bigfix side, but part of that, for example, and Frank could probably show you on your Bigfix screen, pick a computer, and if Frank picks his, it's probably going to say, as a user, Frank Hansen, right? Great, Bigfix knows that as a core property value. However, it doesn't know who his manager is, what group he is in AD. Because Frank is also pulling that AD data, we can stitch that together. And that's what Frank means about when the data comes across eBridge, all the other data sources we're using, Frank kind of ties them together. So at another customer, for example, that had a mobile solution, you could key in, for an example, and I'll just pick on Frank Hansen, and it's going to show us, hey, here's what we have, here's his information out of AD, by the way, here's his software usage analysis that we got out of Bigfix, and by the way, here's his mobile phone out of your MDM solution, right? So how we can pivot and report on the data in the CMDB is greatly enhanced by that correlation.
An important point here too is this data that we're bringing in from AD is outside of ServiceNow's discovery model. So this is completely separate from ServiceNow. You don't need to purchase discovery in order to pull this data. Our bridge pulls it, in the same fashion, and we're trying to then take this, step one further and say that, if we bring this Frank's user information over, we also want to say what computers is he tied to, and then by nature of that, if he owns it, if an asset is his, what software has been deployed on his given computer. And again, this is all outside of Bigfix, and then you throw in the Bigfix mix here with capabilities of seeing, what maintenance window am I in? So if I want to deploy an updated piece of software to that computer, I can utilize the two components together and say, hey, I want to install Google Chrome to Frank's computer. I now know with Frank's computer what maintenance window he's in. I know if I'm able to deploy that software to him, and then quickly I can make informed decisions without having to really drill into another console. So again, if you're the Bigfix admin and your responsibility day to day is to write fixlets, this is only going to help you from a service request standpoint. But if you need to instrument the functionality in Bigfix and you want to keep it audited in a service request or an ITOM system, this method is excellent for doing that.
Well, and a great example of that, Frank, was even the self-service portal where you can have software packages, again, whether it's Bigfix, SCCM, or whatever, that you published, and a user can go in there and say, oh, look, I need Visio installed, because you also have the AD data, and that would go through an approval process like to your manager, hey, do you want to incur this expense, and then deploy this, and then do the callback into your, in this case, Bigfix. And another point I wanted to make, because Frank just said it, is you do not need to own orchestration in ServiceNow to do this. The Bigfix girder, and actually every girder integration we make through eBridge, is bidirectional. So again, to Frank's point, you don't need to have ServiceNow orchestration to do orchestration. And the same idea with event management. You do not need to own the event management piece. We bring that data in over the eBridge side. So Matt, do we have anything else?
That should wrap us up for the evening, guys. Thank you. Like you said, Dan, if anybody wants to catch up on these at all, you can definitely catch them on demand on either championsg.com or else on our YouTube channel.
All righty. Well, thank you everybody for your attendance. Again, I enjoy doing these shorter 30 minutes ones. Hopefully, I think it was 100% I saw said they like the shorter ones. So I do like them that way. We are going to try to keep doing these, as Matt had said, based on your feedback there, either weekly or bi-weekly, and we'll have different discussions, but we'll try to keep on the same date and scenario so that everybody knows what it is. And as always, we appreciate your time and your patience for listening to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you.